Hello, everyone. Welcome to today's webcast, brought to you by ComplianceWeek and konaAI. I'm Aaron Nicodemus, the editor-in-chief of ComplianceWeek, and I'll be your host. Today's webcast is how ethics and compliance teams are adopting AI. Before we hear from our presenters, let me review the agenda. We're scheduled to go for an hour. During the presentation, please ask questions. Your questions will be kept confidential and anonymous, so don't be shy. You can ask your questions at any time using the Ask a Question function on the left-hand side of your screen, and I'll pose them to our guests during the flow of the conversation. This webcast will offer CPE credit to all attendees. Please use Google Chrome or Firefox as your internet browser, and disable your pop-up blockers to ensure access to the exam. Once I've signed off and the webcast is completely over, the final examination will be presented automatically in a separate window. If you have trouble viewing the CPE test or receiving the CPE certificate, please send an email to webcast@complianceweek.com. Once again, to ensure receipt of your CPE credit, please use Google Chrome or Firefox as your internet browser. If you've missed anything, I'll repeat these instructions at the end of the webcast, so stay tuned. A few other administrative details before we get going. At any time during the presentation, listeners can download the slides from the drop-down menu located on the left-hand side of your screen. There you will also find the feedback form for the webcast. We welcome your thoughts as we are always looking to improve your experience. If you wish to increase the slide size, you can hit the View Slide Full Screen, a button located at the top right of your screen. And lastly, a help button is located in the upper right-hand corner of your screen for assistance. Okay, it's my pleasure to introduce today's speakers. I'm going to let them introduce themselves, and I'll start with Hemma Lomax. Hemma.
Thank you, Aaron. Happy to be here. I am Dr. Hemma Lomax. I head up the Global Business Integrity function at DocuSign. I previously worked at Disney, Snap, Zendesk, and the US Securities and Exchange Commission, and I'm very happy to be here.
Thanks for being here, Hemma. Next up, Vincent Walden.
Hi, Aaron. Thanks for having us. Excited to be here. Vince Walden. I'm CEO of konaAI, which is a Covisint company. We merged with them last year. Super excited to talk about this topic and appreciate you teaming with us and doing this survey. So the insights were pretty exciting and look forward to speaking about it.
My pleasure. And lastly, Tom Fox, who may not need much of an introduction to some of our readers, but Tom, introduce yourself.
My name is Tom Fox. I'm the founder of the Compliance Podcast Network and, most importantly, columnist for ComplianceWeek.
That's right. And he's writing a lot about AI lately because that is a hot topic. So let's get right into our presentation. All right, so ComplianceWeek and konaAI held a survey of risk and compliance professionals in December and January. 193 people responded, okay? And here's some of the things that were found in the survey. And I'm going to throw some of these questions to our speakers as we go, but like I said before, please feel free to ask questions as we go. So this 193 ethics, risk, and audit leaders found that 90% of organizations are using generative AI tools such as ChatGPT and Claude, right? And another thing that we heard was that they aren't necessarily very confident about the guardrails and the governance that they have in place. Only about 25% said they feel confident with the governance that their organization is using to monitor and regulate these AI tools. So I want to throw that question first to our esteemed panel here. Usage is huge. Governance is lagging way behind. What do you take from that? Hemma, why don't you take us through what your thought process is on that?
Yes, no, I love that you've quantified the trust gap. That's the trust gap that we're all thinking about and talking about. I'm surprised to see how high the usage is, but that's great. I'm really excited about that. I'm also surprised to see how high the confidence is, because we're in a moment where we really do have to step up as ethics and compliance professionals and help set that standard and then help people bridge the gap when it comes to confidence in using AI. So yeah, really interesting to hear the data. We are definitely working on bridging that space from excitement and usage to responsible usage at scale. And so I think we're going to talk a lot about that today. How are we going to bridge that gap? And I'd love to hear from Tom and Vince as well. But there's a few things that we're doing at DocuSign to make sure that we're prepared for that next stage.
Tom, do you want to comment?
What's your thoughts on that? Yeah, go for it, Tom.
Sure. So I agree with Hemma on the actual numbers, and the trust gap really, to me, points to a couple of different things. Number one, that the compliance function is going to have to lead the discussion to reobtain or obtain the trust of employees. But it's not simply a technical competence matter of a compliance officer being able to sit down and explain how AI should be used with an appropriate guardrails for the end user. It's also about the trust that things like your job is not going to go away. Things like this is not going to be used against you. Things like this is going to make us a better company and we will all share in the success. So I find it really interesting that the governance part is really subdivided by how we're going to put the rails in place. But the other part is this trust issue. And is this going to generate trust in corporations even more, or can compliance lead the discussion to make sure that employees trust management around this issue?
Yeah, and I'll take it from a technology solution perspective. I see this trust gap, and again, as a software company, I see it's an opportunity because we are seeing we're seeing new tools, and we're building new tools around that trust gap specifically. In fact, one of the reasons why konaAI merged with Covisint last year was they built out this agent management studio. And again, regardless, there are, and this is for something for compliance people to really take note of, who's managing the agents, right, from that trust gap. If marketing has their agents and engineering has their agents doing different things and pulling different data sources, there's been some horror stories that that for example, when a person in marketing is asking an agent to scan the corporate network to find the best marketing financials and proposal pitch, and it accidentally grabs something from the CFO's office that was scheduled to be released to Wall Street the next day and is actually accidentally used in a presentation, that's a bad agent. That's bad governance, right? And you need tools to manage those agents to make sure those policies are in place. And we have something called Agent Management Control Tower that does just that. The other horror story was one where, what if you have your agents doing a continuous loop and the agents are working together to solve a problem for the business, but then they get hung up, so they keep reprocessing and reprocessing the data. We've heard stories where all of a sudden, the OpenAI bill or a Claude bill is all of a sudden, or your hosted cloud provider is all of a sudden like $50,000 in Azure or Google because it just went into a loop and constantly processed. You need policies and governance built into the code. And it's not a policy, it's policy in the code with these agents. And that's something that I'm sure IT is thinking about, but really it's a great question for compliance professionals to think about of how do we bridge that gap? There are technology solutions.
Yeah, I want to build on that thought, Vince, before we go to the next slide, which is, so why should compliance get involved with the implementation of AI tools? Not just for compliance tasks, but for your organization, right? Why should you try to insert yourself as a compliance team into this process? And the answer is, I think, now we had ComplianceWeek had an AI and compliance conference in Fort Lauderdale last month. And one of the answers that came out was companies, the pressure for these tools is coming from the top, right? This survey that we talked about here, over 63% of respondents said pressure was coming from either the board or the C-suite to implement AI tools. So compliance is being told this is coming, and the response should be, well, if it's coming, how can we make sure that it's done safely, effectively, ethically, and in alignment with our own corporate standards, right? So if compliance is something that is aiding that process, guiding that process, coaching people on how to use it, then it's going to be a much smoother process than if you're basically trying to stop things at the end because you see the things going off the rails, right? It's the same old story. This is just the latest tool that compliance is being asked to sort of manage from that perspective. So I just offer that up as a talking point that we can get to.
I'd love to jump in there, Aaron. Yeah. It's the same old story. It's actually the never-ending story, but I love the fact that you see the parallels, whether even though AI is very different, there is something similar for us as compliance professionals here, which is wherever there's an opportunity that the business is excited about, we are going to be thinking about the risk first and foremost. And that's a shame in a way, because we need to think about both at the same time. But certainly we're well equipped to help people get where they want to go strategically, safely and swiftly by doing risk management. So I think we know as compliance professionals that the gap sometimes comes because we think too much about the opportunity and the risk kind of lags, right? It's kind of a threat that's looming, but it's a bit remote. We don't know that it's going to happen. And the opportunity is incentivized by tone at the top and pressure and the ROI of the AI. So I think we are well placed to help with this because we're good at risk and opportunity management together. We're well placed to help the business get where they want to go. And we have to lean in there, right? So we don't want to be too risk averse and think of AI as the villain, but really lean into the language and the psyche of our business partners. It's obviously an opportunity. How can we make sure they get where they want to go? It's that idea of a braking system that helps you go faster versus stopping you. And that we are really good at being the architects of that kind of ecosystem. So that's the bit I think we need to be leaning into, being the architects of the ecosystem that will allow people to keep moving.
Yeah.
Tom, there's a question from the audience here, and I want you to take it on, which is, are we talking about overall company use of AI? Or are we talking about just compliance departments using AI? I think we're talking about both, but I'd like you to take that on.
Okay, so certainly, I'm going to leave the compliance department using AI to Hemma because she's got specific experience in that. So let me take on the overall company. And certainly, the compliance function should lead this effort. We are one of the top functions for governance in a corporation. So we've got that as part of our background and as a part of our remit. But let me pick up on one of the words Hemma used there, which was risk. We are here to be, or at least help the business manage risk. And we help them manage risk by identifying the risk, putting a risk management strategy in place, training on that strategy, and then implementing that strategy. That's the risk management strategy used for any risk. AI is another risk, but it's got this overlay on it that at least I see that there's a more comprehensive inside the company risk. The risk management strategy is to prevent us from getting into trouble, whether that's legally, regulatorily, or doing something that puts the company at risk reputationally or financially. But within the company, we have to create trust that employees feel like they'll be able to use this and use it quickly, efficiently for the betterment of the company. So we are both the one of the lead corporate functions around governance, and we should be one of the lead corporate functions around managing risk. So I see that directly within our remit.
And Tom, if I could add real quick too, the name to answer that specific question, the name of our survey that ComplianceWeek conducted was how ethics and compliance teams are adopting artificial intelligence tools. So it was specifically, when you look at these answers, it's in the context of compliance professionals, risk and compliance professionals who are members of ComplianceWeek mainly, because it was your database answering these questions for their departments. But Tom, you're so spot on in the overall governance. Look, DOJ is throwing compliance under the bus right in the first paragraph of the ECCP. It has a whole new paragraph of why artificial intelligence needs to be something on compliance's radar. So go ahead and read that if you have questions of whether you should be invited to the party or not. The answer is yes. When there are discussions around AI use at the board level, there's definitely compliance considerations according to the DOJ, because you'll be held accountable for it. But also, just in terms of the guardrails, like we mentioned, and help asking those questions, making sure that, hey, look, if you do this right, it won't spin up a continuous loop, or you won't have where you'll reduce the risk of leakage of material, non-public information going out. So it is a double-edged sword in that.
And if I might add, we often talk about program maturity and the DOJ guidelines as separate to the opportunities and objectives of the company, as if we were an independent entity just trying to improve our own function. I don't want to get meta for us, but actually I want to share some examples when we get to it about how we're using AI in the function to help the company use AI, right? So it's a bit meta, but we're not just using AI to do our same old risk management training and comms. We're using AI to make sure that the company can be responsible in all they do. And that obviously today the question is about how the company uses AI. So I'm sure we'll get to it, Aaron, but we don't operate independently as a function. We actually are there to help the company. And how can we use AI to help the company use AI is really the meta question.
I think this is a perfect segue into something that you talked about at the AI event, Hemma, which was you were talking about how compliance was basically right at the starting gate with some of these AI tools that you were rolling out, and you were embedding, ethics and the company's policies and procedures in the product before it rolled out. I think that's a perfect, talking point. Let's hear about that.
Yes, so there's a great example of the way that the company is starting to use AI. So no matter what we and the members of our audience might think about AI and our usage, it's running, right? Everyone else is already using it as well and trying to learn to use it. So what we found was that when we were seeking ways to support the business get where they wanted to go, we were invited into rooms to learn about how the business was using AI. One example I'll give you is that our sales team are experimenting with an AI avatar being in the calls, right? So being in the sales calls to help. So think of an agent, but it's personified. It looks like you or I do right now in the Zoom call. And that sounds pretty scary to a compliance professional. Hold on, you've got the AI in a call with customers. What do you mean? So in the beta testing, in the pilot phases, we were invited in to learn about this, and we were able to use our AI to train that AI. Again, back to the meta point. So what do I mean by that? We were able to generate, using our own AI tools, training for the avatar. What are the top risks that come up in a pre-sales call? What sorts of Q&A might you get, and what should you say and what should you never say? And then we were able to create 50 to 100 instantly questions to test the avatar. So now we sit in every week with the avatar, no customers right now, and we train the avatar, we test it, we try to break it, we give it hypotheticals, we ask it to do all sorts of things, all the fun things that we try to avoid as risk professionals. We see if it will do it, we test it. So there's an example of, yes, as I said, I used my own AI to create that training, that testing, that protocol. We then take the call recordings of our testing, put it back in the AI and say, make it harder. Give us another way to test it. So we're iterating week on week on making sure that we've got some defensible standards of confidence in this tool before it's deployed. And that's where the magic comes in. If you get comfortable with using AI in your function, you can deploy it to help the business go responsibly. And you can imagine the story that sales team now gets to say is that we didn't just deploy this, we had the integrity team in with us week on week, making sure it was the best it could be. Will it be perfect? We're not sure. We're working towards inching up on the confidence standard. And again, because we've started, we know that we'll get there. I think in the olden days, we may have been told about that afterwards, or maybe invited in once. But the fact that we're able to be a useful partner, leveraging the technology to up-level the technology is kind of exciting. So that's one example where we've been in with the business and the tools that they've been using and focusing on raising the standard of confidence.
Yeah, and can I just comment too on this, Aaron, as we go into this slide too? What I found in the survey that I thought was particularly interesting was we asked, across a whole host of compliance functions, are you using AI now or what you're planning on in next year? And there were some growth areas I wanted to point the audience out that I thought were interesting. Risk assessment and controls monitoring. Only 38% are using it now, but it's expected to double, almost double, 62% plan to use that next year in assisting with risk assessments. Huge opportunity. Regulatory change monitoring, and this is really it. We're seeing this with export controls and trade compliance. I'm seeing it in insurance industries, where you have to monitor all 50 states for their insurance records, et cetera. Anytime where you've got government bodies or regulations where you've got to sit there and monitor changes, it's a great opportunity for AI. For change monitoring, it was going from 40 to almost 60%. For export controls, they're using AI almost 29% now, but it's expected to go over to 71% next year. So export control is a big one. Of course, that's very hot in the news recently as well. Same with regulatory reporting, 33% going up to almost 67%. So there's a lot of areas across the business where if you've got lots of teams doing repetitive tasks, it's a great way to help them be more efficient and do more with less.
I want to. There's a question from the audience that's perfect for this segue. The uses that you're talking about, Vince. The question is: internal audit, and more specifically, investigation units are also beginning to increase their appropriate/ethical use of AI. Do you have any stats on that? I don't know if that was a question in our survey, but I think it is a use case that some compliance teams are attempting to explore. Isn't that right?
Yeah, and I'll say, "Mwahaha." That's a great question, because what's so fun about and we'll talk more about this in a minute on agentic AI. So we all know generative AI. When you go in and ask ChatGPT or Claude a question, you get a great answer and test it, etc. But when you have agentic AI, and again, the word I'm going to use is RAG. Remember this word for the audience: retrieval augmented generation, RAG. No one really talks about that, but that's where to me, that's the power of where generative AI and agentic AI is going to be. When you can build bodies of domain knowledge. So think about internal audit. You've got your internal audit, historical internal audits, you've got risk assessments, you've got segregation of duties tests, you've got internal controls tests, transaction monitoring tests. All of those can be individual agents that can use their RAG model, which is, think of that as like a little miniature LLM, a miniature large language model. So maybe a small language model, but they don't use that word. They call it a RAG, whatever. But those RAG models are trained domains so that you can have your internal audit team of agents and your investigations team of agents. So, the investigations teams of agents, one is historical investigations, others trained with third-party risks, others trained with transaction monitoring, one's trained with law and legal regulations, and they all work together to help you conduct your investigation better, cheaper, faster. And Hemma, I know you're using it at DocuSign for agents, and maybe that's a great way to expand it, but different groups, internal audit, compliance, we've got great ones building out for procurement and finance. But again, that's offside of the survey, because the survey was on compliance, but it absolutely is working across the risk management and enterprise risk continuum.
And I can give one example of that. There's a question in the chat about small companies that don't have the resources to create their own AI. It's a great question. Even if you're not a small company, you may not have convinced anyone to give you resources yet. And so, to the point that Vince's making on the RAG model, Google has a notebook LM product. Easy to access. That is a RAG model. That you put what you want in there. So you put the world of information that the chatbot or whatever it might be can read. It's just your policies, for example, not anything from the web. And that's a mini RAG model in action. It's very cost effective. You don't have to have an enterprise version of it. You can get your personal version, but use the notebook LM as a RAG. And if you've been in it, those of you that know it, it's wonderful. It's not just a chatbot. It creates podcasts for you. It creates training for you. It creates slide decks, infographics. It's quite magical what you can do now with your closed off world of information. So, Vince is absolutely right. These things are changing every day, and the accessibility is amazing. But even if you can't invest in big new tools right now, your everyday bog standard subscription tools have these functionalities in them, and you can do that safely. Again, what's your standard of confidence? The RAG is so that you don't go outside the documents you want the AI to look at.
I want to move on to this next topic that comes up in this slide, and I want to put this question to Tom. And it's also, there's a couple of questions that are addressing this. Basically this gap, right? There's this push for AI tools in all parts of the organization, including in compliance, but there are certain really serious risks that need to be addressed as the organization moves forward. Data quality is one of those, and one of the listeners is talking about, you've got to make sure that personally identifiable information, PII, doesn't get into the AI model or into the AI data set, right? You've also got to make sure that proprietary data, trademarks, other things don't get somehow sucked in and then become part of the public domain. There's explainability, right, to regulators. You've got to be able to say, this is what the output is, and this is how we got to it. And the regulator is not going to accept AI did it. No, the regulator wants to know that you understand the process of how your data turned into this output, this answer. Tom, talk about some of the risks of AI and what you're hearing from compliance folks about how they're addressing them as they roll these tools out.
Sure. So in addition to the risks that you listed, Aaron, let me just remind listeners that I think last week a lawyer lost the attorney-client privilege or the work product privilege, rather, because he used an open AI to help prepare an internal document that was going to be allegedly used for privileged conversation. So there are multiple ways you can lose individual data protection for not simply PII, but for your own work product if you're a lawyer. The information, or the data rather, from the survey was pretty stark, Aaron, with 65% saying data quality or access issues was their biggest challenge. I'd remind listeners that back in 2020, the Department of Justice in the 2020 version of the ECCP said compliance has to have access to all data lakes, data silos, data across an organization. So that's the expectation of the regulators regarding your access issues. But when it comes to the personal identifiable information or other information, and it can be company proprietary information, it could be information which could damage your company reputationally as well. This is where corporate governance and exactly what compliance does to manage risks in other areas is so critical. You have to identify the risk, you have to put a plan in place, then you have to train on that plan, and you have to monitor the results of that. So you have to talk to employees about what types of data go in to how they may be using AI. Emma has a great analogy about the employees being drivers, and I'll leave that to her to explain that because she does it so well. But you're going to have to trust your employees. You can't sit over them literally or figuratively watching everything they enter. You have to explain to them in a way they understand the potential dangers, and then you have to put the guardrails in place that hopefully they can't get specific proprietary or PII information and use it in a way that would expose it. But the risks are there. But I think we have the processes in place to manage risks, because that's what compliance does on a daily basis.
Yes. Can I just underscore that? I think I actually would say, Aaron and Tom, you're probably firing up everyone's amygdalas in some ways, right? Because we're all like, oh my gosh, so much for us to do. But your last sentence is really empowering, which is we do have this skill. And what you just explained, Aaron, I call the decision intelligence gap, right? Because actually we should know how to explain how we protect these things even without the AI, right? We should know how we do these guardrails. And if we can explain that, we can then do the same risk assessment with the AI, because the AI is just the same thing, but at scale, right? So if you don't already have walls for your privilege, the AI is not going to see the walls, right? If you don't already have good inputs, the AI is just going to pick up those bad inputs and scale them. So we really need to think about the architecture and the ecosystem in which we're operating. Just as Tom said, as we do when we let drivers get behind the wheel, right? We don't just let people get on the wheel and worry about things that could be risk. We think about the architecture, the ecosystem. We have certain things that we can do: a highway code, signs on the road, lines on the road, street lights, speed cameras, highway patrol, traffic court, you name it. And then we trust the employees to make good decisions on the road. And so that decision intelligence, I think, is going to be our superpower. We don't realize we've got it, but we already know how we control for risks. We already know how to protect the privilege. We already know about data integrity and data governance. What we've got to do is be able to articulate that well so we can train the models.
Yeah.
And that's really the role for us now, is to articulate our great expertise, our expertise in the loop, and train the models with it. And so I don't mean to sound too toxically positive, but I really am confident that if we bring our amygdalas down, we're going to realize that we actually do have the frameworks for risk management, the same way that if I asked you now, if I told you, gosh, there'll be autonomous vehicles on the road, how would you cover for that? Engineers are doing that, right? We need to be the engineers and architects of the risk management for these new technologies. And so that's kind of the analogy there. I think that there's more, we can say more about the driving. I like to talk about ways, we'll get to that. But this idea of using the technology to help us get where we want to go, giving us decision useful information along the way, crowdsourcing risk intelligence along the way from the users so that we can continue to grow our expertise when it comes to the risks, the vulnerabilities. But what we mustn't do is say, gosh, this is impossible, because we've been doing it manually for decades, right? We've been protecting the privilege manually for decades. We've been protecting data integrity for decades. And one practical tip I'll give to the teams is you don't have to deal with rubbish in, rubbish out. This is a really nice moment in time where you can use the technology to create better inputs. So I'll give you a concrete example. I mentioned to you about putting my policies into a RAG notebook. Somebody asked what RAG meant. Retrieval augmented generation. It just means you augment the generation through a retrieval from a closed space. So I mentioned putting the policies that we have into the notebook. But now I've realized what would be better is to make policies that the notebook can read easily. Hold on. No longer am I making short policies that humans don't want to read. I'm making longer, more detailed policies with FAQs, right? That the AI will want to read. Remember what I said to you about training that avatar? I put pages and pages of testing and training together to train the AI. It can handle it more than a human. And so you can actually start changing your inputs, rewriting your policies so that the AI will read them and leave much less room for doubt when the humans extract them through the tools. That's the future, is us really understanding we have the expertise and the tools will only augment our ability to manage risk.
Yep. Can I add one thing to that, Aaron, before you comment on this? Because I love the car driving analogy. You're right. Street signs are a form of compliance, if you think about it. And I said this in our AI governance conference in our last panel, but I talked about SQL way of thinking. Again, Tom mentioned the number one issue is data quality access. And another one was 50% in the survey said that, poor integration with existing systems. We all know, several hundred of you on this webcast, it was a great turnout today. We all struggle with getting access to the relevant data sources that we need to give us the transparency for compliance. Let me just give you this one tidbit of advice from an old school SQL guy, and again, as an accountant in my training, was with Excel. We were trained in the 90s and in the early 2000s, or just say pre-generative AI, pre-2022. The only way that you could get data into a system and work together was to have a primary key that you could join. Remember, like in Access databases or SQL, left join, right join, you had to have what's the company ID or what's the social security number? That's the joining field. Throw that thinking out the window. Let me repeat that. That is the wrong way to think about AI, especially when you're building RAG models. And again, don't ask a RAG model as you described it. Don't ask the RAG model what the weather is tomorrow. It won't know. It's not going to go out to the internet and find out what the weather is. It's not connected. It's only what you put in that little model. That will help reduce hallucination too, because it's not going to make it up. But that point of lose the SQL thinking, the beautiful thing about building out these RAG models, these mini LLMs, is that it will understand just context of the documents. It's not going to look for a primary key to join. It's just going to understand the content so that you can point your chatbot to that RAG and ask questions of it, and it will pull from that content. It doesn't need a primary key. And for those old school SQL thinkers like me, that's profound. And that just unlocks a whole bunch of creative thinking. So if you've got policies, photos, documents, video, whatever, around a domain topic, put that in a RAG and go to town. Now check it and follow your quality processes. But as Hemma did, don't be afraid to experiment.
Before we go to the next topic, I want to take another question from the audience, and this is a good one. This is about small companies, right? So what about small companies that don't have the resources to create their own AI and are addressing off-the-shelf AI use within teams, transactions, etc.? For example, note takers at transactional or pre-transactional or negotiation meetings on the company side, but also used by counterparties. The risk assessment and the response there is quite different. So if you could just, whoever, I'll open it up to the three of you, talking about small teams. Sometimes compliance officer is the only member of the team in some companies. How can they use AI? And I think there's lots of opportunity there, but I'll let each of you take a crack at that.
Do you want me to go first?
You go for it. Go for it, Hemma.
Yes. So firstly, think of the art. I don't want to be too complacent here, but think of the art of the possible, because there's this idea that it's a tools problem, a tooling problem, but it really isn't. It's a decision intelligence and a systems problem. So you've got to think to yourself, what are you trying to achieve? The way I look at it is, what is your job description? Right? What are you trying to achieve? And what of what you're trying to achieve could be outsourced to the tools available to you? Okay, and so that's a metaphor, really. What we've done at DocuSign is we've created digital assistants. It's a metaphor, but we've named digital assistants that are basically doing all the tech, right? So I have a new job description for my digital assistant. I named and hired one. His name is Otis, Optimizing Technology for Intelligent Systems. Otis takes a lot off my plate so that I can think. Now, to the question about what am I going to be thinking about in a small business, as a small business, all you need to do is start thinking about how you can optimize the systems that you have. You don't need large tech to do that, right? There are obviously benefits to investing in the tools that are that have layers and layers and layers of trust built in. Okay, and I'll talk a bit about that. Vince could talk about how he's done that. There are certain tools that it's nice to invest in if they've been able to at scale deploy for a big employee base different use cases. But if you're a small business, I wouldn't worry too much about that scale. You just need to focus on your workflows, your use cases, the way that you want to enhance and optimize your business. So I'll pause there for a second, because I think, Vince, you may have something to say from the software perspective, but I don't want anyone to think that the only way that they can start is by being in a big company or investing. In fact, you're almost luckier because you don't have to be paralyzed by all the options at the big enterprise tooling. You can just think about what is going to help you and, by the way, your client get where they want to go safely, swiftly, and strategically, and start to outsource some of those repetitive tasks to the AI. You'd be surprised how much that will open up your time to start thinking more about the art of the possible. And then again, you can start making a case for the next right thing when it comes to tooling. I will say the tooling is becoming more and more accessible and cheaper as well. So
yeah, and I would say I would encourage everyone, with that question to take their IT folks to lunch. Take them to lunch and say, how are you doing it? What are some of the tools? How can we leverage it in compliance? They probably have it for you for free with Copilot. Because odds are you're probably using Microsoft or Google Cloud Platform, GCP, et cetera, and these tools are built in. It's just a matter of just awareness for using them. One of the things we've done with konaAI is we've tried to make a lot of our tools is very cost effective, and they're not multi-million-dollar implementations. They're not even $100,000 implementations for some of these things. We've got agents now that detect fake documents in receipts and fake invoices based on if it's AI generated or not, and people love it. It's so much fun helping solve problems like this. So I think within most organizations now, or at least I could say 80% of the organizations from the survey, IT, there's something going on, something's cooking that they could probably give you access to that won't impact your budget. And interestingly, I'll throw this out there because we're a Microsoft partner and a GCP Google partner. Interestingly, most companies, and this is mid to large companies, but have a guaranteed minimum that you have to spend with Microsoft and Google. So the budgets that you have for compliance, if you're using it for AI, that money gets spent under IT's budget, not your budget. It's something to think about. It's very important. most like big companies have to spend like $10 million with Microsoft. So your IT folks are constantly looking ways that they can help the business, including yours, in compliance on how they can use AI to, the IT term is consumption, to consume cloud space, to consume Google Cloud or Azure. And your IT might be able to help you fund this. And so definitely put that out there, or at least take your IT folks out to lunch and ask, hey, if I do an IT project, can we put this under your Microsoft Azure budget or your GCP cloud budget? Because odds are it might be a yes, because they're looking for ways to spend the money, because if they don't spend it, they get penalized.
Tom, is there anything you wanted to add on the small company use of AI?
Yeah, two parts. Number one, there are a lot of tools embedded in OpenAI, in Claude, in Copilot that allow you to create your own mini LLMs at no cost, or for the cost of having one of those tools available to you. We've mentioned Notebook LM several times. You can create your own chat GPT that's ring fenced and allows you to do many different things with the data you put in it. So there are ways to create and use AI even if you don't have the resources to create it. It may cost you a weekend learning how to do it, but I think that would be well spent. And Aaron, let me, on the specific point about note takers, let me pick up on what Hemma said and then tie it back to something in the conference. Hemma said, what are you trying to do? What task are you trying to have AI help, whether it's a note taker or any other tool that's currently available to you? Aaron, I think the lead keynote at the conference was the question why. I'm going to translate that as to what's the business reason you're doing this. So if you're a solo compliance officer and or you're a lawyer in transaction negotiations and you're a solo and you may want a record, that's a why. So what's the business reason to do this? And if there's a valid business reason to do it, you can go from there. But I've thought about what you said for a long time. What's your why? And I think that's something that we need to ask on an ongoing basis around what's the why for using this AI tool in this compliance program or for this company.
Yeah, one of the keynote speakers at the AI event last month talked about how a lot of AI users, probably some on this call, skip the first step, which is, why are we implementing this? It's just, well, we've got to do it. Orders are coming from on high. We've got to roll something out. So let's roll it out. And they don't stop to think about what is the pain point that we're trying to solve here? What is the reason for this being? No, they're skipping to the second part, which is, how do we implement it? No. That's where you need to pause, right? And say, why are we implementing this? So I leave that as like a, if you take nothing else away from this conversation, please ask, why are we doing this? And then once you have that answer, then you can start talking about, okay, how do we solve this problem with AI?
Yeah, so true. It's not I've heard so many times, oh, we got to use AI to do what?
Mm-hmm.
It's like, no, solve a problem first. Tell me, what's the problem? And then we map to the data, and then we say how can we use AI to make this process faster?
And may I just say, just layer on one thing for us. As compliance professionals, we're very used to this. In a gifting protocol, the first question you ask is, what is the business justification? Because you're looking at the opportunity, then the risk, then the controls. And so I would encourage us all to start thinking in those terms. No more risk assessments. Do opportunity, risk, and control assessments. And if there's no opportunity, no why, you're spinning your wheels on the risk. So we don't want to be getting into the trap of the same trap you mentioned at the beginning of the survey question. People are, because of tone at the top, there's pressure to use AI. There is no pressure for you to use AI until it makes sense for you. There's an opportunity for you. Then you look at the risks in isolation. Then you put the controls on, and then you size the opportunity. So just to pile on, but I really think the why can be, again, it can slow us down and remember who you are. Is it like that Disney movie? I think it's The Lion King. Remember who you are. Remember what you're doing, and then suddenly you'll start seeing the opportunities to augment your practice.
Yeah.
We are getting so many good questions, and I feel like we can stick to the slides, or we can start talking about the questions that we're getting. So I'm just going to dive into a couple of questions here, and then we'll come back to the presentation, right? So this question really was something that we talked about a little bit already, Hemma. It says, this reader or listener says, good example, Hemma. Waymo's autonomous vehicles, when they run into trouble, are being controlled by a group of human monitors in the Philippines. So we may keep our jobs for now. I think the question there is, we talk a lot about AI and human in the loop, right? What does that actually mean? Could you each talk a little bit about what human in the loop means and why it's so important?
I'll mention first what we mean by AI or human in the loop. It's human first with AI assisted. We talked about when we were building we're building out Agentic AI personas, and kind of similar to what Hemma was talking about, for all sorts of groups, for investigators and compliance professionals. And we struggled. I didn't want to call them, they're not digital employees. They're digital assistants. Employees, that just sounds weird, and I don't want to compete with employees. I don't want to take. No, these are your assistants. And when we think about that, they are here to serve you. They're not here to replace you. They are here to help you do more with less. It's like a typewriter and a computer. And so that human in the loop concept, though, is making sure that the ultimate decision is yours, is run by a human for checking. You can have it do remedial tasks like data gathering and compiling, but it's just like with generative AI and going back to your high school or college days, you wouldn't take someone's paper that they wrote in on an exam or a midterm exam and just turn it in. And again, you have to do the work yourself. If your name is on that paper, you are responsible for what it says, and you've got to read it, fact check it. And from a technology perspective, what I do a lot in my outputs in my LLMs or my chatbots, I make sure that when I reference something, there's a hyperlink to the source. So again, you can control how the chatbots give you information, even within certain parameters. And when I say, hey, look, here are 20 risky transactions that we think are likely for a conflict of interest, or in a banking scenario, here are 20 dormant accounts that look very suspicious that these employees have touched recently and pulled money from. Here's what you might want to look at. Here's the hyperlink to the transactions to the source documents. Mm-hmm. So you make the decision. We're just presenting you the facts. That's, to me, human in the loop. And Hemma, you live and breathe this.
You've articulated it beautifully. There's two pieces of it. One is the existential threat, like, oh, let's keep the humans at the party kind of thing, right? I'm not going to cover that one. The other one is the responsibility piece, which is, again, that standard of confidence. When would you be confident just sending an AI-generated note over? And when is it really important that the human has some judgment and expertise there? But what we've been doing now is we've been moving away from the term human in the loop and starting using the term expert in the loop. Why? Because literally, having a human in the loop doesn't really mean too much, right? Could be my daughter, my 7-year-old daughter could be a human in the loop. So what we're really thinking about is what expertise is necessary for that standard to rise. And let's use Waymo as an example. What Waymo didn't do was put the, I'm going to refer to the conference, because at the conference, the ethical dilemma of the trolley problem came up. This idea that you're in this trolley, and if you go one way, you're going to hurt two kids, and you go one way, you're going to hurt another adult, and which way do you go? This ethical dilemma, this moral choice. What the Waymo engineers did was they avoided us ever getting to the ethical dilemma. What they did was they built in the governance before they deployed. And that's what we need to do as well. We need to make sure that we architect for good decisions. We create the conditions for good decisions. We do that very well as humans, as compliance officers. We do that. We build the culture. We look at the incentives. We look at the pressures. We look at the decision choices, and we make it easier to make the right one. That's the same thing we need to do as experts in the loop. Not put the people we serve, our clients, on a crash course to very difficult decisions. They shouldn't have to be on a daily basis deciding between good and bad. We should be architecting it so they never get to that point. And so this idea of experts in the loop, I think, is probably going to be the new, I call it the new STEAM, the new STEM, or the new reading and writing, a new literacy that we need.
I like it.
The reason I like experts in the loop, there's a few reasons. One is we're talking about experts. We're not calling you villains anymore. You're not the insider threat. You're the person that can grow, continue to grow with your expertise with the technology. I kind of like that framing. number one. Number two, what does it require of us? It requires us to be good at driving and make sure that we're safe on the roads. It does actually incorporate the responsible uses. So just as when it comes to the driving, we have this social contract, and it's true for the majority of drivers that they will make good decisions at every turn. We want the same with responsible AI uses. And so I really think we need to move towards definitely have a human in the loop, but try to get that human to lean into becoming an expert in the loop so that they can build the decision architecture before you deploy. They can bring their judgment in at the right time and not too soon, because there's no point deploying a tool where a human has to check 100% of the output. That's just another step you don't need, right? Then you don't need the tool. What you need to do is get a tool where you can raise your standard of confidence so that the tool can deal with 80% of it. Gifting protocols are a good example. You want to triage out auto answers to most of those submissions. And then that 20% or whatever it might be, where really it's quite nuanced, that's when you want to bring the human or the expert in. So think of humans in the loop, the whole ecosystem. It's architecting the tracks before you put the car on the road. And then it's also that moment when the Waymo does actually go to headquarters. I think there was one example where a lady was in the car too long and actually she was having a baby. That's when it called the headquarters, right? Certain weird things you can't expect. Waymo is trained to get a human on the call. Maybe they're in the Philippines, as someone said. But that's what we need to think about, is how are we going to be experts in the loop, first in the design, then the monitoring, and what are we going to trust the machines to do without us? Waymo does a lot of that. Obviously, it's a literal example. And what do we need the humans to come back in? When do they enter the room again? So I think it's naive of us to say a human always has to be in the loop. That's just not true. But you have to decide as an expert when a human needs to come back into the loop.
I'm going to keep going with questions because there's so many good ones. Here's another one, which is about training, right? They're asking about, let me find it here.
Oh, you know what? I answered it offline quietly, and I shouldn't have.
You did?
It was,
okay.
It was, you know, what are some good training sources just starting day one? You know, just to help get people learning. Now, and we talked about this in our panel, Hemma, if you recall, too. I'll open up with, man, the best about a couple months ago, actually about 6 months ago, I took the best course on prompt engineering. And so for those of you who haven't heard that, the word prompt engineering, how to ask the chatbots the question, there's a whole science to this. Of, you know, there's a difference in your answer when you ask Claude or ChatGPT. You know, I'm a CEO of a software company, a SaaS software company in compliance. Now present me a market analysis report on leading trends in compliance. Yeah, that is a completely different answer than present me a compliance report on leading trends in compliance. Completely different answer. So all sorts of ways to ask the bots to where you get tremendously better results. And that's called, you know, learning prompt engineering teaches you some of the basics of AI and how to do it. Also, again, a lot of you may not have heard, I didn't know what RAG stood for. I'm like, what an ugly word to call something for technology, but it's really, to me, one of the most, you know, one of the biggest ways we could drive value from it. RAG, and there's a word called CAG, which is continuous augmented generation, which is more like the data continuous feeds, like the Dow connecting to a Dow Jones watch list or an OFAC list versus just connecting to documents, which is a RAG. All these things, just start researching and Googling. But Coursera was a great resource. Again, that's, I think, an online course, or Udemy is also a good one. Just take a couple courses, intro courses on AI is my recommendation. Hemma, what do you think?
Yes.
And how did you get your team up to speed?
Well, that's a really interesting question. And we've not done any formal courses. So let's talk about that a little bit, because I think the other kind of call to action is that we all have to relearn how to learn. And again, let's use the car. Maybe you did driver's ed, maybe you took that test, that computer test at the DMV, but really you learned how to drive in the car. That's just the truth. And what I mean by that, what did you do? There was some controls. You had an L plate. You probably had to have an experienced driver in the car with you. You probably only drove around the Walmart car parking lot the first few times. You'll put some safety rails on, but you do need to get in there. The other piece is this. There are some fantastic courses, not just paid courses, free courses, YouTube, for example. But what's really wonderful is The AI, the public-facing free AI, will teach you how to learn. You can ask it to create you a short-form course. You can say, I've got 3 hours, I've got 3 weeks, I've got 12 months. You choose, and it will generate a curriculum for you. And I don't just mean it will tell you to go to the library and look for a book. No, it will give you the link to the YouTube video, the link to the article, the link to the way to practice. It can teach you how to do it. And so Otis is not just my digital assistant. Otis is also teaching me how to use Otis. Otis is giving me ideas on what Otis could do for me. Otis is creating the art of the possible for me. And we use this framework called the 3 Horizons framework, which is, Otis, can you help me with what I'm doing today? That's Horizon 1. Can you help me design what I should be doing in 3 years' time? That's Horizon 3. And can you tell me what I need to do to bridge the gap? And so I think what's being asked by the audience is, how do I bridge the gap from my use today and where I need to be tomorrow? And don't be afraid. Do everything that Vince said if you've got the time, but don't be overwhelmed by, gosh, I need to go back to school. What you need to do is get behind the wheel and ask the autonomous driver to give you some tips, as it were.
We are right up against time, like literally 4 minutes left. And so I just want both Tom and Vince to have a chance to sort of give final thoughts, and you too, Hemma. This key implications here. Pick one and talk about what you see as something that you can convey to the audience as important that they take away from this session. Tom, you go first.
I'm going to stick with trust, Aaron, because that is something that every compliance officer is in charge of trust. They're in charge of institutional justice. They're in charge of institutional fairness. They're in charge of culture. And trust is as big an issue in AI as any other issue, including technical competence. So I hope you will think about how are you going to engender and then maintain your employee trust around all the AI-focused topics we've discussed today.
Vince.
I have 5 things for the audience in terms of cleans, because I thought about this beforehand. First, compliance is moving from periodic reviews to continuous monitoring. So that's where Agentic can be helpful. AI assistants are here. They're not employees, AI assistants, and they're going to be embedded not only in the enterprise functions, but in the compliance functions to accelerate team performance. Your third-party risk management, if it's a process to take 3 or 4 weeks to onboard a vendor, is going to take 3 to 4 days because of automation. So AI assistants are coming. Build the policy as code. So again, going to that trust issue, you can put the parameters in. The agent management controls are in place that regardless of whether it's Claude or ChatGPT or OpenAI, there's bots that sit on top of it that put the governance in place. You should be aware of it as a compliance. Multi-agent collaboration, that is Agentic AI. So Otis, as Eva's sophisticated, you're using acronyms. I just call mine Eva, Stan, Tom, and just give them names. But they work together to solve your problems for you as your assistant. Multi-agent collaboration is going to be awesome. And it's going to get us from, and this is an old Gartner saying, could we ever get to prescriptive analytics, not just predictive analytics? But with generative AI and specifically Agentic AI, it's not only what's going to happen, but here are the 5 things that you might want to do about it, because it's pulling from the RAG model or even from an internet domain in a safe environment to say, here are 10 DOJ cases, and here's the transactions in your data. You might want to look at it. And so those 5 things, continuous monitoring, AI assistance, policy as code, multi-agent collaboration, and getting to prescriptive intelligence is what makes compliance actually a really cool and exciting place for technology right now.
Right. Mic drop moment, Aaron. Let me just follow that very quickly to say, yes, we are, what I like to quote Hamilton, the musical, how lucky we are to be alive right now, right? How exciting it is. And the trust layer that you've both talked about is really our opportunity to shine. We are ready to architect the trust layer, the ecosystem that will be the architecture of trust. 2 tips for that. Hone in on your decision intelligence. You have decision rubrics that you haven't articulated, but you use every day. Articulate them so you can train the AI on your expertise in the loop. And then keep learning to be an expert in the loop so that you can architect that trust. That's really, quite, like you said, it's very exciting for us that we have this skill and it's in so much need right now. So lean in there, don't be overwhelmed, and enjoy yourself, because we're very lucky.
Great, thanks. I feel like we could go for another hour, and I wish we could, honestly. But I'd like to thank everyone for joining us today. I'd like to especially thank Hemma Lomax, Vincent Walden, and Tom Fox for their insights. And I'd like to give a special thanks to konaAI for making this webcast possible. Thank you very much, everyone.
Bye, everybody.
Thank you. Thank you. I just want to go through and make sure everyone can get their CPE credits, and then we'll close. To obtain your CPE credit for this presentation, please disable your pop-up blockers to ensure access to the exam. The webcast will close automatically, and the final examination will be presented in a separate window. If you have trouble viewing the CPE test or receiving the CPE certificate, please send an email to webcasts@complianceweek.com. Compliance Week events bring together influential leaders across compliance, legal, risk, and ethics for engaging discussion on top-of-mind compliance news, the sharing of best practices, program benchmarking, and networking. Speakers include practitioners, regulators, thought leaders, and more. For more information on our events, visit complianceweek.com/events. This webcast has been recorded and will be available later today to Compliance Week members on our website under the Webcast tab, which also contains a library of additional CPE webcasts. If you'd like to learn more about becoming a member, please contact us at info@complianceweek.com. As a member, you receive full access to tools and resources, discounts to conferences, and to our editorial coverage, including the 2 stories that were linked in the slide deck on the topics in this presentation. Check out complianceweek.com/membership to learn more. Thank you, everyone, for joining us. Goodbye.